Shalom, shalom, giving honor and praise unto the Creator and the Maker of heaven and earth. My name is Yeshaya Yisrael of the tribe of Dan of the nation of Israel. This particular presentation, we're going to be talking about history and quote lieu of what is referred to as quote Black History Month. And brothers and sisters, I do not, as noted, claim to know everything, and I'm open, definitely, to constructive criticism. So, let us begin in this particular case. Shalom, giving honor to the Creator of heaven and earth. This presentation in lieu of Black History Month and connecting it to show how we, the said quote Black/African American, are the true house of Israel, is this presented. I do not claim to know everything, and I am open to constructive criticism. The introduction. If the slave is not allowed to read the Bible, the sin rests upon the abolitionists, for they stand prepared to furnish him with a key to it, which would make it not a book of hope and love and peace, but of despair, hatred, and blood, which would convert the reader not into a Christian, but a demon. Now, what are we looking at here, brothers and sisters? Is a statement that was made by a politician during the era of the 1800s. And it distinctly says, if the slave is not allowed to read the Bible, and for those who are very familiar and acquainted with the history, he or she would know that we were not, as they said, people allowed to read. So what this particular politician was saying was the abolitionists stand prepared to furnish him, the slave, with the key to it. Now, it says that the Bible will not make you a Christian, according to that, but a demon, and not full of love and peace, but of despair, hatred, and blood. Now, for those who already know, they already are familiar with the fact that the people who in many cases were doing the slave revolts were in many cases literate, married, and were motivated. So a slave is ignorant. And as the point made in the book Roots by Alex Haley, and that is they didn't want our people reading because they figured the less that we knew, the less trouble that we will make. You understand? So that's just something we want to point out for edification purposes. Next slide. Notes on the history of Israel. We were besieged several strong times. Some of the nations were the Canaanites, the Philistines, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Arabs, the Ethiopians, the Egyptians, the Moabites, the Edomites, and the Americans. Now, what we have just went over there in that particular matter was just a discussion about some of the nations that came up, say, against us as a people. Now, when I'm talking about a people, I'm speaking about us being in very candidness, the house of Israel or the Israelites. So we wanted to go over a particular matter and show references on why we say what we say, show why we say what we say, and leave it for the people who care to research the information and such. The Babylonians razed the city of Jerusalem after laying siege to it for 2 years. Mountains surround Jerusalem. Psalms 125. Gates and walls were used as protection in the cities of Judah and Benjamin. The other cities of Judah and Benjamin were destroyed quicker. So, looking at this particular matter, those who are familiar already know that the Babylonians were a people who were already in power at a particular case. When the Assyrian Empire began to fall, the Babylonian Empire began to come up. Now, this connects it to world history, brothers and sisters, because it begins to show what people were doing with other people in this particular case. All right. So let's go on to the next part. Thank you. The siege made upon the capital of the northern tribes was for 3 years. The capital was Samaria. Prior to that time, some tribes were taken into captivity: Gad, Reuben, and Manasseh. 2 Kings chapter 10 by Hazael, the king of Syria. The king of Assyria, Tiglath-Pileser III, attacked Israel in 734 BCE when the tribe of Naphtali was taken captive. So what we're talking about right there, brothers and sisters, is the dispersion of the Israelite people and the disintegration of the Israelite kingdom in this particular matter. Now, the people whom we mentioned in here, this case being, we want to real quick show with a highlighter, Tiglath-Pileser III was, brothers and sisters, a king of the Assyrians. All right. So we want to, and I would like to show, say with this. All right. Syria and Assyria were not the same people. But nonetheless, once it came down, say, to the Israelites, they were a people that were against the house of Israel. In 538 BCE, we want to show this with the laser pointer. In 538 BCE, the Persian king Cyrus II defeated Nabonidus of Babylon, thereby annexing Babylon. The people of Judah, Benjamin, and a lot of Levites were permitted to go back to the land to rebuild the temple. So what we're looking at right there is you had it, brothers and sisters, to where the Assyrians were a people in power, right? And then after that particular matter, brothers and sisters, the Babylonians came up as a power. After Babylon came up as a power, you had it to where the Persians came up. Now, for those who've been following the channel or so forth and so on, this information has already been discussed. What we're doing is giving like a mini intro, brothers and sisters, and then speaking upon how it connects to what we're talking about with us connected to the Bible, history, who is who, and so forth and so on. All right. Let us go on, if you will, to the next part. The Canaanites and the Philistines. Now, for those familiar, we went over here and said about the Canaanites and the Philistines. So I wanted to take a little time out and show in part what were we talking about? What you're seeing on the left-hand side is an image found in ancient Canaan about how the Canaanites looked. And what you're seeing on this side, on the right side, is how the Philistines looked. All right. So we know good and well, brothers and sisters, that the Philistines are a people who descend from the ancient Egyptians in history, just as much as the Israelites descended from a people called the Chaldeans. All right. So these are things we want to emphasize for edification purposes. All right. The Canaanites and the Philistines. Next slide, please. The Assyrians and the Babylonians. All right. What we're seeing here is a picture of an Assyrian king dated to the era of the 8th century BCE, and a picture of a Babylonian, according to the book The Babylonians by Gwendolyn Leake, and how the Babylonians looked. So this is just something we want to emphasize and point out for, say, edification purposes. All right. Next part. The Ethiopians and the Egyptians. Now, this on the left-hand side is a picture of an Ethiopian or a Cushite. Now, when you go in the Bible, in the book of Chronicles, you read about Zerah the Ethiopian and the war that he made against Asa, the king of Judah. Now, according to historians, this is a depiction of Zerah of Ethiopia. All right. So we just want to point that out on the left-hand side of such. All right. And upon the right side is a picture of Necho of Dynasty 26 of Egypt. You can read about this in the scriptures. All right. And in looking at that, he was the one that went and fought against the tribe of Judah when actually the Egyptians went through the land of Israel to go and fight against the Assyrians the Babylonians on behalf of the Assyrians. So for those who are familiar with that, let us go on to the next part, please. The Americans. The people you see here are Sir Francis Drake and John Hawkins. Neither one lived into the 17th century. Both were traders of our ancestors as slaves. So when you go back all the way here, brothers and sisters, right, and it says the Canaanites, the Philistines, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Arabs, the Ethiopians, and Egyptians, the Moabites, Edomites, and Americans. What I was attempting to point out by showing the picture is that those were some of the images of the people who came as leaders of the captors against us as a people. All right. So these are things we want to point out for reference purposes. The Assyrians and Babylonians of importance. You have on this side here Shalmaneser III, Adad Nirari, Tiglath-Pileser III, Shalmaneser V, Sargon II, Sennacherib, Esarhaddon, and Ashurbanipal, the second. So this is just a list of people on the matter of the Assyrians who was of importance, say, to the house of Israel. And on this side, we see here people of importance of the Babylonians to the house of Israel. Nabopolassar, Nebuchadnezzar, Evu-Merodach, Nabonidus, Belshazzar. So these are things we want to point out in that particular manner and so forth. So let us continue on with this presentation. All right. The Romans defeated the Greeks in 146 BCE. Pompey of Rome captured Jerusalem in 63 BCE. The Edomites during this time were anticipating their move into the land of Israel. In 66 AD through 73 AD, there was a very bloody war in which thousands of Israelites were slain. Many Israelites were crucified. We see here Israelites were taken to Egypt, and some Israelites settled there on their own accord. In the Apocrypha and 2 Maccabees chapter 1 verse 2, we see the brethren the Jews that be at Jerusalem and in the land of Judea, wish unto the brethren the Jews that are throughout Egypt health and peace. God be gracious unto you, and remember his covenant that he made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, his faithful servants. So what do we want to point out, brothers and sisters, in speaking upon what is referred to as, quote, Black History Month, and what we're talking about in this particular matter is that we don't want our history to be just downtrodden and forgotten. One of the things that the Greeks was doing is that if you was found with a copy of the book of the law, you was killed. One of the things the Romans was trying to do was trying to sit there and make sure that the records of the Israelites were destroyed. So these are things when we begin to see, say, like Greeks, Romans, who are Europeans, Americans who like run the society, who are descendants of Europeans, and us. Why is it that reading is considered to be boring? Why is it that entertainment is considered to be more important? Why is it that things that don't cause one to sit back and consider presented more as a way of a litmus? These are things we want to sit there and point out for reference and for edification purposes. Brothers and sisters, we do not want this to sit there and die out. So what I've come to learn recently, brothers and sisters, is that the teaching, the ideology, the thought is that we as a people do not need to focus on what happened with us negatively. I happen to in part disagree with it. One of the things I attempt to do in putting the books out, Thank the Most High, is that we don't want slavery to be forgotten. We want to chronicleize the colonization of us as a people and not try to minimalize by saying, okay, well, we're just going to focus on they who was brought over to the United States. When you know good and well that there were those that were shipped to the Caribbean and then reshipped to the United States. Those that were shipped to the United States and then shipped to the Caribbean. You understand? So these are things we want to present for edification purposes. Nor do we want it to be a thing in which we are told that we shouldn't sit there and focus or think about what happened, say, with us as a people. We are, and I have known and experienced this, we are the only people who are told to get over something. Nobody else is ever told. Recently, the actress Whoopi Goldberg is now in trouble because of a statement she made about the European Holocaust with Jewish people. You can't tell them to get over something, and she didn't mean nothing harsh in what she said. She has been suspended from the show that she was on because of a statement. But once it comes down to us, we're told to get over it. We're told not to sit back and dwell on it. We're told to sit there and just move on. See what happens when you tell other people that. What happens? Next slide, please. Notes on the history of Israel. The next people to attack the Israelites were the Arabs. The Arabs were spreading Islam as far as they can go, China, Romania, and even Ghana. In 627 AD, the Arabs attacked the Ashanti people, forcing them to convert to Islam. The same was done to the Mandinkas or Mandingas in 1099 AD. The information I got that you see here in a matter of 629 AD all the way to 1099 AD, That comes, brothers and sisters, from a book called From Babylon to Timbuktu, which was written by the author Rudolph Windsor. As early as 1501, black people were seen in Haiti as slaves. When Cristobal Colon, set sail in 1492, black people were being imported to Europe at a rate of 1,000 yearly. In 1646, black people were brought to New Amsterdam, now known as New York. Yes, black people were sold as slaves in Manhattan. In New York in 1646. Is it odd that 1646 is an area code for Manhattan? So just wanted to, brothers and sisters, point that out for reasonable purposes in discussing what we're discussing and talking what we're talking about in this place. All right. Sorry about that. Let's go on to the next slide. The Arabs and the captives. Now, what you're seeing, brothers and sisters, is something that I personally don't really speak on much about, like the Arab slave trade and what happened and how, in part, from Zanzibar all the way into Western Africa, what happened with the people from Tunisia to the Gambia and from Zanzibar to Western Africa, what happened with the people from the Arabs that were being enslaved. Now, I know those who know, like who read the books that I wrote, or so forth and so on. I mostly, when regarding slavery, talk about the European / American and what happened with the said African American. The reason for that is because one, I am a quote said African American. So I'm going to talk about what affects and affected my immediate people the most. It is not to say that our people or people in general were not enslaved by others. That is not to say that other enslavements did not happen. Why do I mention that? Is because in many cases, when quote unquote said black people are discussing the matter of slavery, we are told what we should talk about. Well, talk about what happened with this one and that one. No, if you feel in your spirit that that should be discussed, then you should talk about it. But you don't ever tell anybody what he or she should talk about. This is open information. There is self-publishing. So a person has the right and the freedom, for the lack of a better word, to talk about what he or she cares to talk about regarding a particular matter and not feel controlled. Like, well, you should talk about that. No, you talk about it if that's where your spirit is at. So just wanted to point that out. But brothers and sisters, sadly, as recent as the 1960s, you had it to where the Arab slave trade was still going on. All right. So this is something we want to point out for edification purposes. In his book, Kohen Mikael, the book called Israelites and Jews, The Significant Difference, he spoke about the matter of the Arabian slave trade. When you watch meticulously the movie called Roots, you would begin to see before the character LeVar Burton was captured, you would begin to see the Arabs along with the Europeans doing the slave trade. When you watch that movie very meticulously. So we just want to point this out for edification purposes. Next slide. The Seleucids and the Romans. Now, just like brothers and sisters, what we did here, the Assyrians and the Babylonians of importance, I did another list. And you can sit there when you're watching this later on, subscribe to the channel if you care to, and take notes upon this. Seleucus the first, Antiochus the third, Seleucus the fourth, Antiochus the fourth. Those were brothers and sisters, and we're going to, all right, show with this here. That's the Seleucids. The Seleucids were part of the Greeks. What you see, brothers and sisters, with Pompey, Julius Caesar, all the way down to Hadrian, those were the Romans. All right. So you had it for those who were following some of the great empires that came up: Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome. All right. So once the Roman Empire fell in two different aspects, it fell in 476 CE or 476 AD, brothers and sisters, to the Vandals and other peoples. All right. And then it fell, the other part of it, brothers and sisters, fell in 1453 when the Byzantine Empire fell. All right. So now, if the Byzantine Empire, which was in Eastern Europe, is the other part of the Roman Empire, the first recorded slave ship going and taking our people into captivity was 1441. So the Byzantine Empire was still in existence in the beginning of what we understand to say as the Atlantic slave trade. So these are things we just want to point out to our people while the matter of, quote, Black History Month is prevalent, and many of our people are attentive, hearing, seeing what's going on, can share the video and things of that kind of nature. All right. So let's go on, if you will, to the next part. Thank you. The matter of the northern and southern kingdoms. Now, brothers and sisters, when we speak upon saying here northern and southern kingdom, what we're talking about is the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. Now, in a book called Deuteronomy 28, 15 to 68, I detailed the information about how Judah, the tribe and or the kingdom, was not the only ones brought into the Western Hemisphere. One. Secondly, the Assyrians captured people of the northern and southern kingdom. What you're seeing on the left-hand side here, we want to point out, brothers and sisters, with the laser pointer, what you're looking at there on the left-hand side is a picture of Yehu, king of Judah, bow down to Shalmaneser III, the king of Assyria. What you're seeing on, brothers and sisters, the right side is an Assyrian ambassador and leader taking captives from Lachish during the era, brothers and sisters, of 701 BCE. So you have it to where in the 8th century BCE, people of Judah was being brought into the Assyrian captivity. This is documented in the scriptures and in other places. So one of the things, as the scriptures point out, be it the Israelite enslavement under the Egyptians in Exodus, be it the Israelite enslavement under the people of Cushan Rishatayim, or the Moabites or the Ammonites, or anything of that kind of sort, brothers and sisters, never ever do we want to sit there and minimalize what happened. We don't want to give a romanticism of a particular matter. We are not to sit there and forget what our people have gone through, going through, will go through, and so forth and so on. All right. So in this age when people just want to party, have fun, and it's cool to have that, you understand? But as we know in the Bible, like in the scriptures, it distinctly says what? The person who gains understanding and wisdom, so does that same person gain anger and sorrow. That's in Ecclesiastes in the Bible. So let's go back up. Knowing what it says in Ecclesiastes chapter 1 in the Bible, when you gain wisdom and when you gain understanding, you gain anger and sorrow. See, that's why a slave is ignorant, because a slave can't read. You understand? So now in here, when we read in the beginning of this, the Bible will be made a book of despair, hatred, and blood, because then we'll begin to sit there and see where we fit into the world history and not be a mystery. You understand? Why we went through the things that we've gone through and what is our future? Where is our land, language, and culture? Because it can't be black. Black is not a land, language, and culture. You understand? So our people were then and had to been given a new name and a new identity, because our true identity was not expected to be taught and told to us. That's why we want to point these things out. the matter with the archer Titus and Hadrian. Now, the archer Titus is on this side here where you see the menorah. When in the era of 70/71 BC, pardon me, 70 or 71 AD, they was taking the menorah and other artifacts from the temple that was in Jerusalem and brought it over to Rome. Now, this is no disrespect in what I'm about to say. You notice, like, say, in Pan-African thought, right? Oh, they took the things out of Ghana. They took the things out of Nigeria. They took the things out of Egypt, and they put them in their museums. And that's true, they did. But these same Romans and these same Europeans also took things from the house of Israel and put it where? Because they made a picture and a monument of what they did to the people of the tribe of Judah and the Levites that was still in the land in the 1st century AD, and what they took, as you see there. So if they was carrying that out, where were they carrying it to? So not only did the Europeans take things from Western Africa and Egypt and brought it to Europe, they also took things of the Israelites and brought it also into Europe. So let us go on in this particular case here. The diaspora in part and the captives. Now, brothers and sisters, being an author myself, and I give thanks to the Most High in being an author, right? One of the things we want to point out is you always want to give credit to where you got your info from. It doesn't make you any less of a scholar for doing such. It doesn't make you bad. It doesn't mean that your credibility is shot. What it shows is that you do due diligence, and on top of that, you're willing to sit there and state where you get your info from. This map that you see on the left-hand side comes, as pointed out there, from a book called God, the Black Man and Truth by Ben Ami. He wrote that book, may he rest in peace, when he was among us. So what we're seeing right here, brothers and sisters, is a picture and map of the people when the Assyrian Empire fell to Babylon. You had it to where there were Israelites that left and went to Northern Africa. All right. Now, as time went on, other Israelites began to migrate as well. This is pointed out in the book From Babylon and Timbuktu, all right, written by Rudolph Windsor. So now when you begin to see, all right, on this side here where the highlighter, or pardon me, where the laser pointer, all right, let me get that back up, sorry. Where the laser pointer shows, according to Will Durant in his book called Caesar and Christ, he stated that the people of Israel after 70 AD was in southern Saudi Arabia and crossed over into Ethiopia. So now let's look at this going back, speaking about the diaspora and the history and so forth and so on, right? In the Apocrypha, we already pointed out in 2 Maccabees that it says the Jews that are throughout Egypt. Now, Egypt is in Northern Africa. Egypt is not in Europe. All right? So if they were already going to Egypt, and for those familiar with the Bible, you know good and well Israelites was going to Egypt since before the time of the prophet Jeremiah. All right? So now looking at this from Egypt into Ethiopia, the people would eventually keep on migrating, as was pointed out on this channel. All right, let's go on if we will. Called African in America and a place called Negro in Africa. What are we looking at here? We want to, brothers and sisters, take this time out here, all right, The Stono Rebellion, 1739. The Stono Rebellion, the largest slave insurrection in British North America, began nearby on September 9, 1739. About 20 Africans. Now, this is not something I wrote. This is something I'm citing. All right. About 20 Africans raided a store near Wallace Creek, a branch of the Stono River. Taking guns and other weapons, they killed 2 shopkeepers. The rebels marched south toward promised freedom in Spanish Florida. Now, for those familiar, Florida or Florida, all right, is from the Spanish word meaning like flower. Florida, the state, became part of what we call the United States in 1845. So if we're talking here, the year 1739, all right, to get some kind of a timeline together, we begin to know and see what we're dealing with in this particular case. Florida was never part of the colonies. In this thing here, speaking about what happened in the 1730s and 1739, right, the people were called Africans who did a rebellion. Now, let's look at this here. All right, Negro land. Ethiopic, meaning Ethiopic Sea, Ethiopian Sea. That is today referred to in part as the Atlantic Ocean. Negro land is part of Western Africa. Why do I want to go over and show called African in America in a place called Negro in Africa? Because what they refer to as true Negro land is where the majority of the people who were the captives were taken into captivity. So looking upon that particular matter, Negro in Africa and in America, the people were called Africans. Because a lot of times people sit there and state, oh, you can't find no kind of references where we were called African, which we already know is a misnomer as a name because of Scipio Africanus. Whether it was named in honor of him or not, that's a whole other matter. Because you'll find some scholars say that Africa was named after Scipio Africanus. Then you'll find some that say the opposite. So just let that be by ear for those who do their studies. All right. Now, the Stono Rebellion is dated to 1739, 37 years before there was a legal United States. The Stono Rebellion happened in South Carolina. The reason why that becomes significant and of importance, brothers and sisters, is because it was in 1776 that the understanding of the United States came to be. So before there was a legal term called the United States of America, when those places, brothers and sisters, were referred to, say, as colonies, and so forth and so on, there was slavery still going on in them places. Now, in dealing, say, with Black History Month and Black people in the United States of today, right? The common date that's generally used and supported, brothers and sisters, is 1619. We want to talk about 1619 in the next presentation that Creator willing will be done next week. All right. I want to take and do respect advantage of the time that our people's attention is there thinking on history and presented what we're talking about as Israelites. All right. So let's go on to the next part, if we will. Okay. The first slave owner in America was not only a Black man. He went to court and demanded it. Anthony Johnson is said to be, brothers and sisters, the pioneer of American slavery. Now, for those who've been following, one would know that we've discussed this on several occasions. Why do I mention this now? Is because we don't want it to be, oh, it's discussed and moved on. We want to keep it hot. One of the things that I come to understand as an Israelite, they say that when you stay away from the camps for a while, stay away from Israelites for a while, you lose your spark and your fire, and said such. So now, in this age, when people start talking about let's get over slavery. Let's not talk about it. You have it to where Mississippi recently, the state of Mississippi recently was talking about banning Black history being taught. So while we are up there clapping hands and trying to sing songs and everybody is everybody and so forth and so on, these people are trying to make laws to ban the teaching of Black history. Do you see why it's important to sit there and get into this? Yes, we know good and well that that our history did not start with, it is not only confined to slavery, but we don't want to sit there and act like it didn't happen. We want to sit there and keep that knowledge out there, so nobody can sit there and try to just minimalize it and move on as if such was not the case. All right, let's go on into the next part. Where did they get this picture from that we see? Dated to the era of the 1650s. But it was not until the 1820s that pictures were taken with cameras. And it was first notably done by Will Harrison in the 1840s with John Quincy Adams. So if this is dated to the 1650s, where did they get this picture from? And as pointed out in the book, From Assyria to America, this picture that you see here is actually a person named Lewis Hayden, not Anthony Johnson. So what they did is just take up a picture of somebody, put it there, not thinking people may do, quote, due diligence. All right. And everything was just supposed to just be expected and just move on, like nothing happened. But you can't let people, to put it in street terms of today, you can't let people play you like that. You understand? You can't sit there and allow people to act like, oh, well, we're just going to move on like nothing happened. No. The book of the Proverbs says that somebody will go and follow behind and check the information. You understand? So let's go on. In this case here, all right, from Washington to Monroe, who were presidents, the images were made in sculptures or paintings. So in light of that, brothers and sisters, we have to ask, who painted the image we see of this Johnson? All right. So we've discussed the matter of Anthony Johnson in the past. I remember going on YouTube and seeing people talking about Anthony Johnson was the first slave owner and he was a Black man and so forth and so on. And I remember putting videos up that were done, that I did, speaking upon a particular matter. Because while they're trying to sit there and elude the matter of who was guilty of what, we can break it down like this. I remember being a child, and I spoke recently with friends and family about this. I remember the very first, and I don't do it no more being a grown man. I remember the very first time I stole something. It was $10 from my mother. I made sure that the coast was clear after I saw it. Let me make sure everything is all right as far as it goes with trying to be a crook, even at that young and tender age. And then going in there and putting it inside of my lunchbox. And then I just walked by my mother like, doop, 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 doop. Okay, I got to go to school now. All right. Somebody's going to take me to the bus stop. I remember that like it was yesterday. So, and I'm now 41. And I was at that time 4 years old. Yeah, I know. I was a child, put it like that. Point being is, I was hoping that she would just be just so happy and nobody would ever try to check out to look into the drawer to see where the money was at. That's the same thing that's being done with us. Nobody's expected to go and open up the drawer or open up the book or open up the archive to sit there and see what's going on, to see if there's anything missing out. So when they can sit there, brothers and sisters, and give you this picture, when pictures were not made like that in the 17th century, and just put any picture up there and say that this is the pioneer of American slavery, we have to begin to see something is wrong. All right. William, a Dutchman in 1625, received a license to trade slaves in Brazil, Virginia, and New Guinea. Now, Virginia was a colony since the year 1607. Remember we hear about 1619 in Jamestown, Virginia? I wondered and asked, what made the guy in 1619 comfortable bringing 19 or 20 black people as slaves to that colony? It's because slavery was already being done in that place. See, what happens is the attempt is we're going to say, no, it wasn't the United States of America, it was the colonies. Well, no, it was not the colonies, it was when the Dutch was ruling it. This is why we want to point this out, that somebody that was a Dutchman in 1625 received a license to trade slaves in Brazil, which is in South America, Virginia, which is in the United States of America today, and New Guinea, which is in West Africa. Note, the meme says that Anthony Johnson is the pioneer in American slavery in the 1650s. Yet in the 1620s, we see one Dutchman as having a license to trade slaves in Virginia. That information about this Dutchman comes from a book called The Slave Trade, written by Hugh Thomas. You can look that up. So these are things we want to point out for reference and edification purposes. Let's go on, if we will. Anthony Johnson was not the pioneer of American slavery, and the facts will show as follows. The Dutch had Axum slave port. They had Elmina slave port. The Dutch took the English slave port built in 1631 and 1655. Balboa, who was a person who traveled, an explorer, had 30 blacks as slaves when he went to the Pacific Ocean in 1513. Cortez, in the issue with Mexico, conquest, had 300 blacks as slaves, this being in 1519. The first slave ship to go from Africa to the Western Hemisphere was in 1518 to the West Indies, then in 1538 to Brazil. So now, when we go back to this particular part here, it says William, a Dutchman in 1625, received a license to trade slaves in Brazil, Virginia, and New Guinea. You do know, in many cases, they who were brought to Virginia was already enslaved in other places and shipped over there. Now, while they're trying to tell you about the aspect in the matter of Anthony Johnson, and let's look at even what the meme says. In 1654, 1655, did you know about John Punch? John Punch in 1641 was made a permanent slave, and he was black. So when you're trying to sit there and say about this person being the pioneer of American slavery, they really are thinking that people won't, just like I hoped when I stole as a child, that my mother didn't check my lunchbox or go and look in her drawer. So do the people's hope we don't pick up a book and study. Let's go on, if we will, brothers and sisters. All right? Now, bring it out. This is Dred Scott. In the 19th century, he was told that he did not have the rights that a white person has. This was said by Chief Justice Taney. During this time, there were 4 Supreme Court justices who were slaveholders: James M. Wayne, Peter Daniel, John Campbell, and John Catron, or John Catron, were their names. So let us real quick, brothers and sisters, if we will, all right, highlight, highlight, highlight. These were 4 people who, during the time of Chief Justice Taney in the manner with the Dred Scott decision in the 1850s, they were slaveholders. Their Supreme Court people were slaveholders. And you serve on the Supreme Court to death. Next slide, please. Passage to Freedom from Slavery. Memorial to the Underground Railroad in Boone County. And we're going to conclude with this here. In memory of all the slaves in Boone County, those who helped them, and the slave descendants who remember and honor them in their legacy. Dedicated 21st of March 2005 by the Problem Solving Team, a diverse group of students, grades 5 through 8, St. Joseph Academy, Walton, Kentucky. The team designed a memorial package as part of the Monument Challenge sponsored by the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center, Cincinnati, Ohio. The memorial design was awarded a first place prize of $500 in 2004. Passage to Freedom from Slavery. Now, why do we want to point that out real quick before we close out? Brothers and sisters, is because we don't want it to be forgotten what we as a people been through. Slavery in this society, as pointed out on this channel, was said by a politician in the 1840s. Governor Hammond actually was the governor of South Carolina. And he said, it is the cornerstone of the republic edifice. It is intertwined in it. We pointed out that both Texas and Mississippi spoke about seceding from the Union so that way they can continue to fight on the side of the Confederacy and promotion of having us as their captives. Lastly, dealing with the people, we want to emphasize this here, please, brothers and sisters, and that is this here. Brazil, Virginia, and New Guinea. What do we want to point out? The separation of the black man, woman, and child in the Western Hemisphere, in a marginalization or making it marginalized, if you will, and making slavery a minimalist matter is done by separating the mindset and the history of those in South America, the Caribbean, and the United States. One ship brought a brother to Virginia and his other brother to Brazil. So what we are portraying and presenting is that the people in bulk who were taken via the Atlantic slave trade were the descendants of the tribes of Israel that scattered into Western Africa, fleeing ever since the era of Assyria's empire, Babylon's empire, Persia's dominance, culminating with the Greek and Roman hegemony and persecution. Many went over into Western Africa and then was brought, say, by the Dutch and others to the Western Hemisphere. When presenting this, you would find some people would disagree with it and attempt to challenge it. See, because when we're talking about us as Old Testament and the history of it, the Son of God in the Old Testament is the house of Israel. See, this is why even brothers and sisters who are Messianic have to always go into the Old Testament to show biblically that we're the Israelites. You cannot biblically show you an Israelite by usage of the New Testament alone. All Israelites have to go to Jeremiah 10, Jeremiah 16, Leviticus 26, Deuteronomy 28. That's all in the Old Testament. You understand? So, in closing out, brothers and sisters, and in giving honor and praise unto the Most High, the creator and the maker of heaven and earth. The contact information is going to be in the description when this is uploaded. Thank you for the time, and I appreciate it. Creator bless. Shalom.